It felt extremely important to have a session that spoke very directly to where we are, in all the senses of that word. I've been coming to Dubai about 17 and a half years, and over that course of time, a number of characters have been instrumental, not only in my own kind of education and enriching, but I believe of the entire ecologies here. And one of those people has been Rami Farook. And what's going to happen over the next 25 minutes, thanks to Anna Bernice's expert moderation, is a sort of journey through the many Rami Farooks that have been, the many Rami Farooks that have stopped being, and the many Rami Farooks that will probably still yet show themselves to us. But Rami is, I think, many things, and Bernice will delve into this, but the word that I think of mostly when I think of Rami is generosity. And so I wanted us to spend some time to, in a way, think about the past, the present, and the future through the necessity of generosity, and what sort of different shapes that generosity can take when it comes to building an infrastructure, and not just infrastructure in the hard sense. I mean infrastructure in the soft sense. I also mean kind of emotional infrastructure. So will you please join me in welcoming the great writer and cultural convener, Anna Bernice, and also Rami Farook. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank God Shimon did that introduction, because I don't know how to introduce Rami properly. I started my career here in Dubai, and mostly thanks to the generosity of someone like Rami, and I'm very excited to delve deep into his practice. His practice is not only just as an artist. He's currently showing right now at Athar Gallery's booth at Art Dubai, but he is also a huge instigator and enabler of careers, a space holder, and really a great mentor. So yeah, I guess I'll get started. My first question to you, Rami, is what was your first encounter of art, and how do you think that has shaped your career so far?
Thank you. First encounter ever?
Ever.
Okay, yesterday when we spoke about this, first encounter in as an art practice, not ever.
Interpret as you wish. Yani.
Probably two films that I watched growing up on repeat. One was, and this is like when I was 5, one was called Dawn. It was an Indian film that I just watched many times. And then an Egyptian film called Khamsa Bab. That was actually quite intense. But yeah.
And do you think that's still undercurrents, how you exist as an artist, or not really?
So coincidentally, the first art form that I considered practicing and studying was film. I still remember I was 15 and I wanted to do a 2-month summer program in New York, and it didn't work out. But so maybe this is how it's connected. I think the first artwork that I created was probably a few drawings, and coincidentally, like the first piece that I have now on the booth is Bismillah, and that was kind of that vibe. And then the other one was, I think it was like a scene that I made with some toys. So it was also a landscape, which is coincidentally also part of the practice. So yeah.
And could you take us back to your first cultural initiative, and what was that like?
The first cultural initiative was probably Traffic. Coincidentally, it's on. Sorry, guys, I forgot to tell Gaff to make it 20-second loops. So good luck, yeah? But yeah, the first space or the first initiative was Traffic, which was a design gallery with its own library and a store. And I had just started collecting art, so I was showing art. I was curating, but back then I didn't even know what curating was or what I was doing was curating and hosting exhibitions. And then one thing led to another, and it evolved to a studio and so on.
And then after that, you opened Satellite, which is also a space in Al Quoz that has taken a lot of lives and a lot of forms, and now also holds a lot of space for young creatives and young artists. Could you also talk to us a little bit about that?
So after Traffic 1.0, there was Traffic 2.0 that was also in the picture. And then about a year later came Satellite. Satellite, I needed it because I was working with an artist. The first artist I ever worked with represented, I was a gallerist. For 2 years, I only represented one artist. So when I did the first Art Dubai, and they asked me to write artist's name and what are you going to do, I just did a solo for James Clark. And so the studio or Satellite, when I got it as a studio for him, but also as storage that I needed because I was going through a collecting phase, which I've retired from more than a decade ago. And so I needed the space. And then after that, it just evolved. So after he left, and honestly, the best party I ever went to was James's going away party. I don't know who in the room went to that one, but it was amazing. It's going to come up. If you see a group of characters on a broken bed, that was that party. فالمهم, what are we talking about?
Satellite.
Satellite.
The best party ever you went to.
Yeah. So then after that, it kind of became a storage for a while after Traffic 2.0 closed. And then I turned it to my studio. And then it had many lives. A lot of artists worked there. Some artists lived there. We had a pop-up restaurant. We built a second floor. Yeah, so much.
And then also recently, you also opened a space called Maison 15, which is a restaurant and a library.
Yeah. And that's Traffic 2.0. Okay.
Yeah, no, see so many spaces and so many lives.
and in 2 seconds only.
Yeah, it's hard, 25 minutes and all of your layers, Rami. I'm really having a hard time.
It's a summary.
But Maison 15 is a restaurant in Barsha South. But for many of us, it's not just a restaurant. It's also a meeting space. It's a gathering space, but also really where a lot of artists and curators have had their first shot at curating something. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about this intersection between your venture into the culinary world, but also holding space for young creatives in Maison?
Yeah. I think unknowingly, I think I like creating spaces that become meeting points. And I also like creating experiences. So Maison ended up becoming that, between the library, the gallery, the garden. And the gallery was fun because, like you and a few of our other friends ended up having their first show. Ruba is also here. I think Ruba was the first one who curated, and it was actually cute. Just shout out to Ruba because when I asked her to curate a show, she was working in the gallery next door, and she thought about it for a few weeks, and she said, "Rami, I actually want to curate a solo of your work." So I think she was the first one to curate a solo of mine. So thank you, Ruba. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, cool.
And I think especially also, and I mean, we didn't talk about this yesterday, but I think a lot of the spaces that you hold and that you run also became very instrumental also during the times of COVID, when a lot of us were here making works, maybe couldn't leave. Could you maybe talk about that time a little bit and kind of the rapid production of works that were happening both in Satellite, Maison, and your other spaces?
So before Maison came General, which was in D3, and General acted as a store, a gallery, a cafe, and a general space for hanging out. It's going to show up if you see a bunch of people chilling on a floor. That was General, and And it was yeah, that was a fun experience. Although we closed it before COVID, I think after COVID we exploded with first of all Bye Bye 2020, which was a weekend-long mini festival with like 50 different participants, of which about 20 of them were COVID businesses that started during COVID. And whether they were vintage stores or food businesses. And yeah, Mesan continued. You know, we had a wedding at Mesan. A lot
Really?
of people, yeah, a lot of people actually had their first dates or their, yeah, it's really cute in that sense. Yeah.
And you know, I mean, I think a lot of us see you as a mentor and also as an instigator, apart from your artistic practice, of course. But I guess I wonder, really, kind of what drives you to continue supporting the arts and culture ecosystem here, especially supporting young creatives and young artists, because you know, yesterday we were talking about this whole idea of the self as an institution, and in one of the interviews done about you, one of the artists, Muhammad Khalid, called you a multi-force and kind of like an institution on your own. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think it comes from two places. Just to know a bit of an origin story, you know, I think as an only child, I grew up being very, very social and very friendly. So even in school, I had a lot of friends. And connect that with parents. Actually, shout out to my dad and my son, who are both in the room. But yeah. So, mashallah, my parents are very generous. So I think between that generosity and that socialization complex or whatever it is, ended up becoming this community-building, supportive personality. Yeah.
And now that I know that you're also kind of expanding this enterprise, I suppose, of yourself into Saudi and really kind of cultivating the scene there. What do you think about the kind of the reinvention of the energy there, especially kind of the building of new spaces for artists to create work?
So just so that you know, my relationship with Saudi is probably 25 years old now. And Sarah's in the room, a friend from uni. So I go way back with Saudi, and honestly, like even in uni, I hung out with the Saudis, not with let's say any other nationalities. And my first wife was Saudi, and then 2010 I ended up curating a show of. So my relationship goes way back, and they've always honestly adopted me as one of their own. Like 2015, 16, there was these two group shows with like 15 artists, all Saudi. I was the only non-Saudi. You know when yeah. So the relationship goes way back then. In terms of production, mashallah, there's a lot happening right now in Saudi. Like I really like, for example, what's happening in Al-Ula with the residency program, and what's happening with MISC. And then in addition to that, there are more underground initiatives. I'm not going to say what so that they remain underground in in Riyadh. And that's great. So Saudi, as my Saudi friends describe it, isn't like this just happened. It's just what's happened now is an unveiling. It's always been happening. You know, like I was raving with friends in the late 90s that were from Saudi. You know what I mean? Yeah, what would be nice is maybe more artist and independent initiatives as well. You know, and some things that are more, more like that. And it will happen. Yeah.
And now you're showing what you would call a prequel to a retrospective here with Atha Gallery. Could you maybe take us through your practice and the works that you have shown here at Art Dubai? I know you've existed as a different cultural entity in Art Dubai, and now you're here as an artist. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the works that you're showing.
So, in terms of Art Dubai, I started off my art practice 2 months before the first Art Dubai, which was back then called DIFC Gulf Art Fair. And so the booth kind of takes you through a summary of the last 16 years. In terms of Athar, Athar and Muhammad, who's with us now, I met him first in Art Dubai, 2009. Very chill, first time meeting, and then 2010 we started to get to know each other. And honestly, in the last couple of years, him and Shihab, who are also in the room, are like brothers, wallahi. Around exactly 1 year ago, we were walking around Sirkal, me and Muhammad, looking at the galleries, and he was like, I don't know, one thing leads to another, and we speak about a work on paper show. Then 5 months later, he tells me, why don't you come and do a solo? That solo becomes, I propose, hey, I want to do a retrospective, because I've been wanting to compile the last 15 years at the time. Then 2 weeks later, I get invited to do an exhibition, to curate a show, so I decide to cancel my retrospective to curate that show. And when I got invited again by Muhammad, to do this show, honestly, at the beginning I was excited, but I was a bit hesitant. I was going through a dip. I was on 5 months of adrenaline working on this amazing project in Saudi. And then I think I lost all that adrenaline. I just stayed home painting for almost 6 weeks and so. But an explosion happened. But I also have been what I described Hamas ala nar hadiya, which is excitement on a low fire. And it still is, like I've probably, this is the most I've smiled and I've been hyper in a while. It could also be the adrenaline and I just had coffee. But yeah, it's been really nice, especially because honestly, I treated the booth as my studio for this week. So this is my 5th day there. I've just been there for maybe 12 hours a day, putting up work. A lot of changes happened, and a lot of works were created on the booth, modified on the booth. You're going to see a lot of works are now 2016, 2023, because I finished them after I put them up. And the best thing about also coming out of this introverted phase is just being able to sit down in one place and everyone coming to you. So that's been the last 2 days.
Speaking of metamorphosis, I think you have seen Dubai metamorphosize over the last couple of years. We all know that it's a city that keeps on changing very rapidly, and you have seen a lot of this change. I guess I have a two-pronged question, which is, when you were a child, what do you think you couldn't have predicted then that exists now? And now, as you are, what do you want to predict for its future?
As a child, I don't think I predicted much about Dubai, but there were maybe a couple of things, or let's say 3 things that were, let's say, the foundations of the city. One was the malls, and so whoever grew up in Dubai in the 80s will probably remember Al Ghurair Center. And so Al Ghurair Center and Sindbad, and so the mall life, which is also the meeting point. Like Wednesdays, because back then Thursday, Friday was our day off. We would start off there, and very simple life. But then it developed. There was Burjuman, and then there was Beach Center, and then there was Wafi, and then Global Village, and so these are all signs of what Dubai is now. The other thing also from the 80s was the trade center, which I remember back then, of course, it was really far. And I remember I wouldn't pass it many times, very rarely, like every few months I would pass it. And every time I would pass it, I would try to count the floors before passing it. And then the third was probably the parties and high school and the good people, So I think these are the 3 things that maybe I didn't predict Dubai would continue, but that's what happened. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Rami, for indulging us this afternoon. It's a great conversation. And thank you so much to everyone for coming to our session.